All right, so I want to talk a little bit about Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2, and how they relate to creation care. Because one of the key things is to see how the scripture relates to this, environmental stewardship, earthkeeping, creation care. We can also talk about those words at some point. So the two key passages that come from Stephen Buben-Prediger's book, Creation Care Discipleship, and it's not he alone that highlight them, are Genesis 1, especially verse 26 through 30. And that's especially verse 26, not 16. And then Genesis 2:15. And so I want to do a little bit of what is called in the business exegesis. In other words, unfolding, leading out of the text into a deeper understanding of the text. That's the intent. So let's look first at Genesis 1, starting at verse 26. So in Genesis 1:26, it's the sixth day, and it's the creation of the animals, including human beings. And here's what God says in verse 26. Let us make humans in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the wild things of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humans in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. So a couple of words that are really important in this passage. And Steve, as I've learned to call him, the author of our book, Creation Care Discipleship, highlights them in his book as well. So the first is the word Adam, which is not only can be understood to be a specific word, a proper name, but also a generic word for the human being, which indeed it is. And I'll get to some play on words that happen with that word, but the text, particularly Genesis 1:28, have this idea of dominion. And the Hebrew word here is kibes, which is not necessarily that helpful, but sometimes that's interesting to know what the words are. And it's closely related to what I would call stewardship. I mean, one of the things when we get into creation care is, what is the right word? Is it creation care? Is it stewardship? Is it earthkeeping, et cetera, et cetera? I love the term steward still. So I'm one of the people that think stewardship's a good word, and we can ponder that, but go with me here. So this idea of dominion can sound like domination. It can sound like we're to dominate the earth. We're to just pillage it, strip mine it, clear cut it, all those things. That could be what might come to mind. But what's interesting about that word is, as I said, it's related to the word stewardship. The Jewish Study Bible, for example, which is a really amazing resource to read the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, from the perspective of Jewish scholars, says this, quote, the Tanakh, that's the way that the Jewish synagogue calls the Old Testament, the Tanakh presents humanity not as the owner of nature, but as its steward. And listen to this, strictly accountable to its true owner. So that's, I think, a really important part of this is we are to manage and steward and care for what God has created. In some ways, we have to go back not only to Genesis, we have to go not only start with Genesis, 1:26, but all the way back to Genesis 1, that God created the heavens and the earth, and that old translation, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God. God starts everything. From God, in freedom and in love, he creates this world. And then we are given an ability to have dominion. Now, I think this word dominion needs to be understood in its context. And this is also in consonance with the way Stephen Buben-Prediger talks about it. You really need to think about this idea of dominion in light of the kings of Israel. Because the language of image is actually the language of kingship. So kings would put up their image to boundary a territory to say, now this image you're entering is under the dominion of this king. And so we're supposed to walk around being little images of God that God is the king over all creation, and we are to bear that image to say God is the one who is the king. And that's what image bearing is. But it's related then, since we have this kingly image, to what the king was supposed to do in Israel. And the key is supposed to do, because we know that the kings didn't do this. We even know from the Bible, I think the passage is 1 Kings 8, 1 Samuel 8, is it? Where, the first king is going to be set up. And God says, what's going to happen if you get kings? They're going to tax you. They're going to take your land. You don't really want a king. You want me as king. And the people say, no, we want a king. So my point here is kings didn't live up to this. But what they were supposed to be was what we read in Psalm 72. And this I don't have projected, so you can either look it up or just listen. Psalm 72, the first 4 verses. Give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to a king's son. Psalm 72, verse 1. Now, verse 2. Here's the key. May the king judge your people with righteousness or justice, and your poor with justice. May the mountains yield prosperity for the people, the hills in righteousness. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people, give deliverance to the needy, and crush the oppressor. So kingship was about caring for the weak. And it's fair to say, as I learned from my Old Testament mentors, professors, scholars, etc., that the kings of Israel were to be judged by how well the least were doing. That was how well the kingdom was doing. Not the rich, not the powerful, but the weak. We'll come back to the discussion in a minute, if that's all right. So that's what stewardship means. And that's what this image bearing means. I love then the idea of stewardship. Rick Warren, the prominent evangelical pastor, had a great line about this. Quote, life is all about stewardship. It all belongs to God. He just loans it to us for a short period of time. The first command God gave to man was to take care of the earth, which includes managing and protecting the environment. I'll give you a little example of this, and then I want to look at Genesis 2. In our church, like many churches, we baptize infants. And I remember once discussing this with other pastors, and we came to the conclusion that it's so good for a parent to let go of that baby and to give it to somebody else to baptize that baby, because that's parenting, is learning to let go. And the earlier you can learn to do that, in some ways, the better off you are. In the same way, I think what Rick Warren's getting at is, yeah, we feel like this earth in some ways is ours to do whatever we want with, but it's actually ours to keep giving away, and ultimately we give back to God this stewardship we have. We have stewardship of children's lives, if that's been your path in life. But at some point, you have to give them away, and same is true with the creation. Whatever we think we own, land and stuff and things that are made from creation, at the end of the day, we're not, nothing goes back, nothing goes with us, right? We can't take it with you, as the old saying goes. And so, but we render an account to God. We learn from Jesus for how we dealt with the things we had. So that's the stewardship. That's the image. That's where dominion fits. Now I want to flip over then to Genesis 2:15, which is the other passage. Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took the man, again, the word is Adam, which could be just translated the generic man, or could be translated Adam, and put him in the Garden of Eden to till and to keep it, to till and to keep it. So Adam is related to the word Adamah, which is ground. So we learned earlier in Genesis 2, verse 8, that God breathes breath into the dust, and that's what gives him life. And so this idea of Adam, the man, comes from Adamah, ground, shows that we're grounded, as you might say, the dirt human, as some people talk about. Let me then mention and read what Stephen Buma Prediger writes on page 66, if you have the book. This is in Creation Care Discipleship. Genesis here speaks of the humans serving the earth. Abad is to serve. So he loves this play on words. Adam is to abad the Adamah. The man is to serve the earth. From the verb abad comes the most commonly used Hebrew name for servant, Abed. And Genesis 2:15 defines the human calling in terms of service. We are called to serve, abad, and to protect, shamar. Dominion must be defined then in terms of service. So here's what I'm saying. Read Genesis 1:28, 126, excuse me, and 128 too. The dominion calling in light of Genesis 2:15, the service calling. Dominion must be defined in terms of service, continuing in this book. We are to exercise dominion as a form of service. It is faulty biblical interpretation or exegesis of Genesis 1 and 2 to focus only on dominion, meaning the authority over, and to assume that dominion means domination. The word shamar, often translated protect, can also be interpreted as to keep, not as possession of an object, but as providing for the sustenance of someone. So shamar is the word to keep, right? And it's highlighted in this passage. So Boomer Prediger likes, for that reason, this term earth keeping. It focuses on the earth, our home planet, and it's biblically rooted, he says. So in his title, you see both creation care discipleship, and then the subtitle, why earth keeping is an essential Christian practice. That's the side point at the moment. Let me say a couple more things about these words. So the word for to serve, as I said, comes from the word to be a servant. Genesis 2:15, abad. It can include to work, to cultivate, to serve, and to tend. It refers, as we see, to Adam's role in the Garden of Eden, to care and to cultivate the garden. When paired with shamar, it gives almost what we would call a priestly connotation. So this is often, these two words together are often used to the Levites, the priests in the Hebrew Bible, to do their duties, is to abad and shamar, to keep and to protect or whatever. But even if you look, and you can also say, besides that priestly duty, in the context, it means also a broader stewardship over creation. That's what I think is the connection that we can make, and that Boomer Prediger wants to make. Now, shamar means to keep or to guard, to watch over. It means to do this with diligence and responsibility, to ensure well-being, to safeguard it from harm. So it's this dual responsibility we have as human beings. We have this dominion, and I think since Genesis 1 was written, we have fully, if not over, fulfilled the command to have dominion over the earth. We can control the earth in ways that I think it's fair to say the writers of Genesis would not have understood or even comprehended. So we really need today to connect that truth that we do have dominion over nature with the side of tilling and keeping it, protecting and serving and nurturing. And I think in that way, set within the context of it's God who gives us this creation, we see, I think, that one of the key elements of the biblical basis of stewardship.